Let's start with a simple but uncomfortable truth most of us walk through life emotionally exposed. We react quickly, feel deeply, and often carry the weight of other people's words, moods, and actions far longer than we should. Not because we're weak, but because no one ever taught us how not to take things personally. From a young age, we're conditioned to seek approval, avoid rejection, and interpret the behavior of others as a reflection of our worth. So when someone disrespects us, ignores us, or speaks carelessly, it feels personal by default. It feels like an attack, and without realizing it, we allow that moment to define our emotional state. This is why learning how to stay unbothered isn't about becoming cold or detached from life. It's about learning emotional discipline. Emotional detachment doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop letting every external stimulus hijack your internal world. There's a massive difference between feeling something and being controlled by it. Most people never learn to separate the two. They feel a sting and immediately assume it must mean something about them. They feel offended and believe offense was intentionally given. They feel disrespected and conclude they are disrespected as a person. These assumptions happen so fast that they feel like facts when in reality they're interpretations. Think about how often your mood changes based on someone else's behavior. A careless comment, a delayed reply, a facial expression you didn't like, a tone that felt dismissive. None of these things physically harm you, yet they can ruin your entire day. That's not because those moments are powerful. It's because we give them power. We interpret them through a lens built from past experiences, insecurities, and unmet expectations. And once that interpretation locks in, the emotional reaction follows automatically. This is where awareness begins. The moment you realize that what you're feeling is not caused by the event itself, but by the meaning you attach to it. Two people can experience the exact same situation and walk away feeling completely different. One shrugs it off, the other spirals for hours. The difference is not resilience, confidence, or toughness. The difference is interpretation. One person internalizes everything, the other filters it. Most emotional pain isn't inflicted, it's internalized. Someone speaks without thinking, and we turn it into a story about our value. Someone is distant, and we turn it into rejection. Someone disagrees, and we turn it into disrespect. This habit of personalization keeps us in a constant state of emotional reactivity. We're always defending, always explaining, always proving, always replaying conversations in our heads. And over time, this drains us. It creates chronic stress, resentment, and frustration toward people who may not even be aware they affected us. The first shift toward emotional freedom is understanding that not everything requires a reaction. Not every comment deserves a response. Not every behavior deserves your energy. Just because something touches your emotions doesn't mean you need to pick it up and carry it. There is a pause available to you in every situation, even if it's only a second. In that pause, you get to decide whether you personalize the moment or observe it. When you observe instead of personalize, something powerful happens. You stop asking, what does this say about me? And start asking, what does this say about the situation? Or even, is this actually about me at all? Most of the time it isn't. People bring their stress, their ego, their unprocessed emotions, and their own internal battles into every interaction they project without realizing it. And when you take that projection personally, you unknowingly agree to carry something that was never yours. Detachment, at its core, is learning to say, this may involve me, but it is not about me. That mindset alone can dissolve a huge amount of unnecessary emotional pain. It doesn't mean you excuse bad behavior. It means you stop internalizing it. You stop letting someone else's lack of awareness become your emotional burden. This is where emotional strength begins. Not in reacting perfectly, not in staying calm all the time, but in recognizing that your peace is more valuable than proving a point, winning an argument, or being understood by someone who isn't listening. The more you practice this, the clearer it becomes that staying unbothered isn't about controlling the world around you. It's about mastering the way you process it. And once you start seeing that distinction, once you realize how much of your emotional discomfort comes from interpretation rather than reality, you open the door to a completely different way of moving through life. A way that is calmer, clearer, and no longer at the mercy of every external trigger. Once you begin to understand that your emotional reactions are shaped more by interpretation than by events themselves, the next layer reveals something even deeper. Most reactions are habits. They're patterns you didn't consciously choose, but ones you learned over time. Somewhere along the way, your nervous system learned what to respond to, what to fear, and what to defend against. And now, those learned responses fire automatically, long before logic gets a chance to weigh in. This is why certain comments feel loaded while others roll right off. This is why one person's behavior can trigger you intensely, while the same behavior from someone else barely registers. The key here is recognizing that being triggered doesn't mean you're weak or broken. It means something inside you has been conditioned, and conditioning can be examined. When you start paying attention to your reactions instead of judging them, you move from emotional autopilot into emotional awareness. That awareness gives you options. Without it, you have none. Think about how quickly the body reacts before the mind fully understands what's happening. A racing heart, tight shoulders, a sudden rush of irritation. Those physical sensations appear almost instantly. The story comes after the mind rushes in to justify the feeling, to label the other person as rude, disrespectful, dismissive, or wrong. But the body already reacted. That's important because it shows you that emotional reactivity isn't a moral failure. It's a physiological response. And once you see it that way, you can work with it instead of fighting it. The problem most people face is not that they feel these reactions, but they identify with them completely. They say, "I am angry," instead of, "I'm experiencing anger." That difference may sound small, but it's the difference between being consumed by an emotion and being aware of it. When you believe you are your emotions, they control you. When you see emotions as temporary experiences passing through you, you regain agency. You can observe instead of explode. You can pause instead of react. That pause is everything. Between what happens and how you respond, there is a space. For most people, that space is so small it feels non-existent. But it exists, and with practice, it can be widened. In that space, you get to choose whether you feed the reaction or let it dissolve. You get to question the meaning you're about to attach. You get to ask yourself whether this moment truly deserves the power you're about to give it. This is where many people resist, because slowing down feels unnatural in a world that rewards instant responses and emotional intensity. We're encouraged to clap back, to defend, to explain ourselves immediately. But emotional maturity is not about speed. It's about precision. It's about responding in alignment with who you want to be, not reacting in alignment with what just happened. When you learn to pause, you begin to see how often your mind exaggerates. A small slight becomes disrespect, a neutral comment becomes criticism, silence becomes rejection. The mind fills in gaps with worst-case interpretations, often based on past wounds rather than present facts. And without awareness, you believe those interpretations unquestioningly. You react to stories, not reality. This is why staying unbothered isn't about suppressing emotion. Suppression creates pressure. Eventually, it leaks out as resentment or passive aggression. Detachment, on the other hand, is about allowing the emotion to be there without letting it dictate your behavior. You acknowledge it, name it, and then decide what to do with it. That decision is what separates emotional intelligence from emotional impulsiveness. Over time, this practice reshapes how you experience people. Situations that once felt charged lose their intensity. Comments that would have sent you into explanation mode no longer feel urgent. You begin to realize that you don't need to attend every argument you're invited to. You don't need to correct every misconception. You don't need to defend your character to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. And something else changes too. When you stop reacting immediately, people start revealing themselves more clearly. You gain information instead of losing energy. You begin to notice patterns in others without absorbing them. You become more grounded, less entangled. That grounding becomes a form of quiet power. Not because you dominate conversations or win debates, but because your internal state becomes less dependent on external validation. This is how emotional freedom is built. Not in dramatic breakthroughs, but in small moments of restraint, in choosing not to personalize, in choosing to pause, in choosing not to let reflexive reactions run your life. And with each pause, each conscious choice, you move further out of the loop of constant irritation and deeper into a state of calm clarity that no longer rises and falls with every interaction. Once you develop the ability to pause and observe your reactions without immediately acting on them, the next shift is understanding how deeply your sense of identity is tied to emotional reactivity. Most people believe they are upset because of what someone did or said, but in truth, they are upset because something touched their self-image. A comment feels like an attack because it threatens how you see yourself, how you want to be seen, or how safe you feel in the world. This is why two people can experience the same interaction and walk away with completely different emotional outcomes. One feels insulted. The other shrugs it off. The difference is not the event. The difference is attachment. Attachment to being respected. Attachment to being understood. Attachment to being seen as competent, kind, intelligent, or good. These attachments are not wrong, but when they become rigid, they turn everyday interactions into emotional landmines. The moment your identity feels questioned, the nervous system treats it as danger. And when something feels dangerous, the body prepares to fight, defend, or withdraw. You're not reacting to the present moment. You're protecting an image. This is where ego gets misunderstood. Ego isn't arrogance. Ego is identification. It's the part of you that says, this is who I am, and this is how I must be treated. When that identity feels stable internally, external input has very little power. When it's fragile, even small remarks feel like threats. This is why people who are deeply secure can receive criticism without collapsing, while others feel shattered by something minor. Their identity isn't on the line. Learning not to take things personally requires loosening your grip on that identity. Not erasing it, but softening it. When you stop needing every interaction to confirm who you are, you stop overreacting to information that contradicts your self-image. Someone misunderstands you, that doesn't mean you're unclear. Someone disapproves of you, that doesn't mean you're wrong. Someone doubts you, that doesn't mean you're incapable. It means they're having their own experience. This understanding creates emotional spaciousness. You stop internalizing other people's perceptions as facts. You allow them to exist without adopting them. That's a powerful shift because most emotional pain comes from fusion, merging your sense of self with someone else's opinion. When that fusion breaks, emotional pain loses its grip. Now, here's where many people get stuck. They intellectually understand this, but emotionally they still react. That's because emotional detachment is not an intellectual skill. It's a nervous system skill. You don't talk yourself into calmness. You train yourself into it. And training happens through repetition in small moments, not through grand resolutions. Each time you choose not to immediately defend yourself, you reinforce safety. Each time you let a comment pass without explaining, you signal to your nervous system that you are not under attack. Over time, your system learns that it doesn't need to mobilize so quickly. Your baseline calm increases. What once felt urgent starts to feel optional. This is also where self-trust comes into play. People who react strongly often don't trust that they can handle misunderstanding, conflict, or disapproval. So they overcompensate, they explain excessively, they argue, they justify, they chase validation. But when you trust yourself, you don't need immediate relief from discomfort. You know you'll be okay even if someone has the wrong impression of you. You know clarity doesn't always require correction. You know silence can be strength. Self-trust changes how you listen. Instead of listening to respond, you listen to understand. Instead of scanning for threats, you observe neutrally. And that neutrality is not emotional distance. It's emotional steadiness. You're present without being reactive, engaged without being entangled. As this steadiness grows, you begin to notice something else. Many people are not trying to provoke you. They are simply acting from their own unexamined emotions. Their sharpness is stress. Their criticism is insecurity. Their dismissal is overwhelm. This doesn't excuse harmful behavior, but it explains it, and understanding reduces reactivity. When you recognize that most behavior is unconscious, you stop taking it personally. You stop assigning malicious intent where there often is none. And even when there is intent, you realize something important. Someone else's hostility does not require your participation. This is the point where emotional maturity becomes visible. You're no longer easily baited. You don't escalate automatically. You don't feel the need to match energy. You respond in ways that align with your values rather than your triggers. That alignment creates internal consistency, and internal consistency creates peace. You may still feel discomfort. Detachment does not mean numbness, but discomfort passes more quickly when it's not fed by rumination, when you don't replay the event in your mind repeatedly, when you don't build narratives around it. You feel it, acknowledge it, and let it move through. This ability to let emotions move through instead of getting stuck is what keeps you from being pulled into other people's emotional storms. You don't absorb their chaos, you don't carry it with you. You allow emotions to arise and fall naturally without clinging to them for meaning or identity. And this is where interactions begin to change. People sense your steadiness, they sense that you're not reactive, that you don't need to be dominant or defensive, that you're not emotionally needy. This often de-escalates tension before it starts. Calm becomes contagious. This doesn't mean everyone will treat you better, some won't. But it means their behavior won't dictate your internal state. You stop riding emotional highs and lows based on how others show up. You become self-regulated rather than externally regulated. And that ultimately is what emotional detachment is about. Not disengagement from life, but disengagement from unnecessary suffering. Not closing your heart, but strengthening your center. When your sense of self is grounded internally, the external world loses its power to destabilize you. You move through interactions with clarity instead of defense, with choice instead of compulsion, with calm instead of chaos. At this stage, everything begins to come together in a practical way. Emotional detachment, self-awareness, and identity stability all point toward one unavoidable truth: peace is maintained through boundaries, not control. And this is where many people misunderstand what it truly means to protect their emotional state. They believe boundaries are something you impose on others, when in reality, boundaries are commitments you make to yourself. They are decisions about how you will respond, where you will invest your energy, and what you will no longer negotiate within yourself. Most frustration doesn't come from someone crossing a line once. It comes from allowing it repeatedly while hoping it will somehow change. Each time you stay silent when something feels wrong, each time you over-explain to be understood, each time you tolerate disrespect because you don't want conflict, something inside you tightens. That tightening accumulates. Over time, it becomes resentment, and resentment is not caused by others. It's caused by self-abandonment. This is why boundaries aren't aggressive. They're honest. They don't require hostility, volume, or emotional charge. They require clarity. Clarity about what you will engage with and what you will step away from. Clarity about how you will speak and how you will leave. And here's the key: boundaries only work when they are enforced through action, not explanation. The moment you feel the urge to convince someone to respect your boundary, you've already moved out of alignment. When you stop explaining yourself excessively, something shifts internally. You realize that your peace does not depend on someone else understanding you. It depends on you honoring yourself. That realization removes the emotional hook that pulls you into arguments, justifications, and power struggles. You stop negotiating your worth in conversations where respect is absent. This also reveals something uncomfortable but liberating. Not everyone is meant to come with you into your calmer, clearer life. Some people are attached to chaos, to friction, to emotional intensity. When you stop feeding that dynamic, they may lose interest, push back, or accuse you of changing. And they're right. You are changing. You're changing in the direction of self-respect. Boundaries expose relational patterns. Relationships that rely on your overextension start to strain when you pull back. Conversations that depended on your emotional reactions lose their charge. And while that can feel disorienting at first, it's actually a sign of growth. You're no longer regulating other people's emotions at the expense of your own. Another important shift happens here. You stop expecting people to behave in ways that protect your peace. Expectations quietly create resentment when they're unmet. Boundaries don't. Expectations say you should act differently. Boundaries say, if this continues, I will act differently. That distinction changes everything. One puts your emotional state in someone else's hands. The other brings it back to you. And when your peace is no longer outsourced, emotional detachment becomes natural. You don't take things personally because you're no longer tethered to outcomes you can't control. You no longer wait for apologies to move on. You no longer stay stuck hoping someone will suddenly see you clearly. You move based on your values, not their behavior. There's also a subtle confidence that emerges when you live this way. You stop feeling the need to prove yourself. You stop performing for approval. Your words become fewer but more intentional. Your presence becomes calmer but more grounded. People may not always agree with you, but they begin to respect your steadiness. And even if they don't, you're no longer dependent on that respect to feel okay. This doesn't mean life becomes frictionless. You'll still encounter difficult personalities. You'll still face moments of misunderstanding. But now, those moments don't hook you emotionally in the same way. You recognize when engagement is pointless. You recognize when silence is strength. You recognize when leaving a conversation is an act of self-respect, not avoidance. Over time, this consistency builds emotional resilience. Things that once consumed your thoughts barely register. Situations that used to ruin your day pass through without lingering, not because you've hardened, but because you've clarified what deserves your attention. You've stopped letting every emotional disruption move in and rearrange your internal space. This is the maturity most people never reach, not because it's impossible, but because it requires responsibility. Responsibility for your reactions, responsibility for your choices, responsibility for your peace. It's easier to blame others for how you feel than it is to examine why you feel that way. But once you do, you stop living in reaction mode, and the outcome of all of this is freedom. Freedom from emotional hijacking, freedom from unnecessary conflict, freedom from the need to defend, explain, or prove yourself. You still feel, you still care, you still engage, but you do it from a place of centered awareness rather than reflexive emotion. So when someone raises their voice, misunderstands you, dismisses you, or behaves unpredictably, you don't immediately internalize it. You don't make it mean something about your worth. You check in with yourself instead of lashing out. You decide whether this interaction deserves your energy, and more often than not, you'll find that it doesn't. That's the final shift. You stop being emotionally available to chaos. You stop opening the door to every storm. You become selective with your attention, intentional with your responses, and loyal to your own inner stability. And once you live this way, being unbothered isn't something you try to do. It becomes who you are.